The heirloom. In the heart of a dense, mist-laden forest, there lay a small, isolated town named Ravenswood. Cloaked in perpetual twilight, the town's ancient cobblestone streets wound between decrepit houses, their windows dark and empty. The town seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something long forgotten. Amelia, a curious young journalist, had arrived in Ravenswood with her partner, Mark, a seasoned photographer. They had come to investigate the eerie legends that whispered through the town's history. Stories of mysterious disappearances and ghostly apparitions drew them in, but the locals remained tight-lipped, their eyes filled with unspoken fears. As they unpacked their gear in the old creaky inn at the edge of town, a cold draft swept through the room, carrying with it a faint, mournful wail. Amelia shivered, dismissing it as the wind. Yet the uneasy feeling lingered, a chill that seemed to seep into their very bones. Ravenswood was more than it seemed, and the darkness was just beginning to stir. As days passed in Ravenswood, Amelia and Mark delved deeper into the town's shadowy past. Their first clue came from an old diary found in the inn's dusty attic. Its pages, brittle with age, spoke of a curse cast upon the town by a wronged witch centuries ago. Each entry detailed strange occurrences and vanishings, eerily similar to the recent disappearances they had come to investigate. Odd occurrences soon began to plague them. At night, whispers filled the air, unintelligible yet chilling, seeming to come from the very walls of their room. Mark's camera malfunctioned, capturing only distorted, ghostly images, even in broad daylight. The air grew heavy with an oppressive presence, and the townspeople's reluctance to speak became more pronounced. One evening, as they explored the edge of the forest, they stumbled upon an old, overgrown graveyard. The gravestones, worn and cracked, bore names matching those in the diary. A sense of dread washed over them as they realized the extent of the town's haunted history. The next night, a violent storm descended upon Ravenswood, and with each lightning flash, shadowy figures seemed to dance just beyond the reach of the light. The occurrences escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own, and eerie laughter echoed through empty halls. Amelia awoke one night to find Mark standing at the window, eyes vacant, murmuring in a language she didn't understand. The sense of impending doom grew palpable, wrapping around them like the forest mist, and they knew they were no longer just observers. They were part of the story now, ensnared by the darkness of Ravenswood. One stormy night, the terror reached its peak. Amelia and Mark, huddled in their room, heard a thunderous crash from the inn's basement. Armed with a flickering flashlight, they descended into the depths, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. In the basement's dim light, they saw it, a shadowy figure with hollow eyes and a twisted grin, the very embodiment of the witch's curse. The figure lunged at them, a malevolent force radiating from its skeletal form. Mark, snapping out of his trance, grabbed a nearby iron rod and swung it with all his might. The rod passed through the figure, which dissolved into a swirling mist, only to reappear behind them. Amelia's flashlight flickered, revealing ghostly apparitions emerging from the walls, their eyes filled with centuries of torment. Desperation fueled their actions. Amelia remembered the diary's final pages, a description of a ritual to break the curse. She shouted the incantation, her voice trembling but resolute. Mark held off the advancing apparitions, swinging the rod wildly, each strike momentarily dispersing their ethereal forms. The witch's spectre shrieked, a sound that pierced the very soul. The ground trembled as Amelia's incantation reached a fever pitch. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the basement, and the figure let out a final, ear-splitting wail before vanishing into the darkness. Gasping for breath, Amelia and Mark found themselves alone in the now silent basement. The storm outside had ceased, and an eerie calm settled over Ravenswood. They had faced the terror and survived, but the scars of that night would haunt them forever. In the aftermath of their harrowing encounter, Amelia and Mark emerged from the basement, their faces pale and eyes haunted. The town of Ravenswood seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Yet the scars of their ordeal ran deep. Mark's hands trembled uncontrollably, and Amelia's nights were plagued by nightmares of hollow-eyed specters. The townspeople, now more open, shared tales of others who had faced the curse and survived, their eyes reflecting a shared understanding. Amelia and Mark knew they had broken the witch's immediate hold, but the darkness of Ravenswood was far from banished. They left the town, their investigation complete, but with a sense of unease. As they drove away, Amelia glanced back at the town shrouded in mist. The diary, now a permanent fixture in her bag, seemed to pulse with residual energy. They had survived, but the question lingered. Had they truly ended the horror, or merely paused it, leaving a door ajar for the darkness to return? Family reunion. Kevin's car creaked to a stop on the gravel path leading to the remote cabin. The woods around him were thick and dark, casting long shadows in the fading light. The cabin itself, a weathered and isolated structure, stood ominously against the backdrop of towering pines. A shiver ran down Kevin's spine as he remembered his cousin Tom's unsettling behavior and Aunt Susan's obsessive need for family togetherness. Kevin hesitated at the door, his apprehension growing. Tom greeted him with an eerie, fixed smile, eyes never leaving Kevin's face. Aunt Susan appeared, her welcome overly enthusiastic, her eyes bright with a fervor that made Kevin uneasy. As they settled in, Kevin couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Tom's gaze followed his every move, silent and intense. Aunt Susan's forced cheerfulness only added to the tension, as if she were hiding something beneath her overly warm exterior. The air felt heavy, and Kevin knew this reunion was far from ordinary. The first night in the cabin, Kevin awoke to the sound of soft footsteps outside his door. Peering into the dim hallway, he found Tom standing there, eyes fixed on him. Tom's questions during the day had already been invasive, prying into Kevin's personal life and relationships, but this silent nocturnal vigil was far more disturbing. Aunt Susan's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She would drift between manic episodes of forced joviality and moments of intense, unsettling silence. She'd laugh at nothing, her eyes glazed and distant, then snap back with unnerving focus, insisting on the importance of family unity. Strange accidents began to plague Kevin. He narrowly avoided a heavy bookshelf that toppled over without warning and slipped on a mysteriously wet floor, barely catching himself before a serious fall. Each incident seemed more deliberate, more targeted. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, Kevin stumbled upon an old chest filled with faded family photos. The images were strange. Members of the family posed stiffly, their expressions blank and lifeless. Among the photos, Kevin found papers covered in strange symbols and a handwritten note that sent chills down his spine. It hinted at a dark family secret, one that had been buried for generations but was far from forgotten. The sense of foreboding grew stronger. Kevin realized that he was not just an unwelcome guest but a target in a sinister plan. The cabin, the family, the eerie woods, they were all part of a dark tapestry he was only beginning to understand. Late one night, Kevin discovered Aunt Susan's journal hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. Flipping through the pages, his heart pounded as he read about her twisted belief in maintaining family purity through inbreeding. The journal detailed her plans to eliminate any outsiders who threatened their bloodline, painting a horrifying picture of rituals and sacrifices. Realizing the danger he was in, Kevin decided to escape. He packed his belongings quietly, but as he reached the front door, he found Tom blocking his path, his expression cold and determined. Tom's earlier odd behavior now made sense. He was a willing participant in Aunt Susan's deranged plan. A fierce struggle erupted. Kevin shoved Tom, trying to break free, but Tom was strong and relentless. They grappled violently, knocking over furniture and shattering glass. Tom pinned Kevin to the floor. His eyes filled with a fanatical gleam. Desperation fueled Kevin's strength as he fought back, kicking and clawing to get away. With a surge of adrenaline, Kevin managed to grab a broken piece of glass from the floor. He slashed at Tom's arm, forcing him to recoil in pain. Seizing the moment, Kevin scrambled to his feet and bolted for the door. Bloodied and breathless, he burst out into the night, the cold air hitting his face as he ran towards the dense forest, hoping to find safety from the nightmare that had consumed his family reunion. Kevin's flight through the forest was short-lived. Rough hands grabbed him from behind, and he was dragged back to the cabin. Bound and gagged, he was placed in the center of the living room, where Aunt Susan and Tom stood, their eyes filled with a sinister determination. The air was thick with the smell of incense and the flicker of candlelight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Aunt Susan began to chant in a low, rhythmic voice, her words incomprehensible yet filled with an ancient, malevolent power. Kevin's heart pounded in his chest as he realized he was about to be part of the family's next ritual, a sacrifice to their twisted belief in purity. As the ritual progressed, Kevin's mind raced. The immediate danger was over. He was caught and restrained, but the true horror was just beginning. The journal's words echoed in his mind, the dark secrets of his family laid bare. He understood now that escape was impossible. He was to become a pawn in their unholy rites. Kevin's eyes widened in dawning horror as Aunt Susan whispered a chilling promise. Her voice, cold and resolute, revealed that the family's dark practices would continue, ensuring their bloodline remained untainted for generations to come. The silent inheritance. Laura stood before the old run-down farmhouse she had inherited from her late Grandma Edith. The once grand house was now a shadow of its former self, with peeling paint, broken windows, and an overgrown yard. The roof sagged under years of neglect, and the surrounding landscape was desolate, with gnarled trees and untamed weeds swaying in the wind. The eerie atmosphere was almost palpable, sending a shiver down her spine. Despite the neighbors' whispered warnings about the house's dark past, Laura was determined to start a new chapter of her life here. She had always been drawn to the house, with its air of mystery and history. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under her weight. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. Laura's cousin Simon, who had always been a bit strange, arrived shortly after to help her fix up the place. He was eager and enthusiastic, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made Laura slightly uneasy. Still, she appreciated the help and hoped that working together would strengthen their bond. As they began the arduous task of cleaning and repairing the farmhouse, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed to whisper secrets of its haunted history. Determined to make the best of it, Laura pushed her fears aside, focusing on the work ahead. Little did she know, the true horror was only just beginning to unfold. As the days went by, Laura began to notice Simon's odd behavior. He seemed fixated on their family history, spending hours in the dusty attic poring over old documents and photographs. His questions about their lineage grew increasingly intrusive, and his eyes would light up with a strange fervor whenever he spoke about Grandma Edith. Laura tried to dismiss her discomfort, attributing it to Simon's eccentric nature. One night, Laura was jolted awake by faint, disturbing whispers. They seemed to seep through the walls, a cacophony of indistinct voices that sent chills down her spine. She sat up, straining to make out the words, but they always eluded her. As she lay back down, she caught a glimpse of a shadow flitting across the room, disappearing before she could fully register it. The unsettling experiences persisted, leaving her on edge and sleep-deprived. During a routine cleanup of the attic, Laura stumbled upon an old family album hidden beneath a pile of dusty blankets. As she flipped through the pages, her heart sank. The album was filled with eerie, sepia-toned photographs of family members, their faces eerily stoic. Scribbled notes in the margins revealed Simon's disturbing obsession with their lineage. There were cryptic references to purity of blood and sacred rituals that made her skin crawl. The deeper she delved into the album, the more horrifying the discoveries became. One particularly chilling entry detailed a ritual Grandma Edith had performed, supposedly to achieve immortality through the sacrifice of family members. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Simon's obsession wasn't just about family history. It was about continuing the dark legacy of their ancestors. The whispers grew louder that night, and the fleeting shadows seemed more pronounced. Laura's unease turned into palpable fear as she began to connect the dots. She realized that Simon's presence was not just to help her. He had a far more sinister purpose. The house, with its decaying walls and dark past, felt like a trap closing in around her. Driven by a sense of urgency and dread, Laura continued to dig through the attic's hidden corners. She uncovered an old leather-bound journal tucked away behind a loose floorboard. As she read through its brittle pages, the horrifying truth about Grandma Edith's involvement in a sinister cult began to unravel. The cult believed in achieving immortality through the ritualistic sacrifice of family members, preserving the purity of blood through unspeakable means. Grandma Edith had been one of its devout leaders, orchestrating dark rituals within the very walls of the farmhouse. Laura's heart pounded as she pieced together the disturbing legacy she had inherited. She understood now why the neighbors had warned her, and the full gravity of Simon's behavior dawned on her. The journal contained detailed instructions for a final ritual, one that required a sacrifice to complete what Grandma Edith had started. Just then, Simon appeared in the doorway, his eyes alight with a crazed fervor. "You've found it, haven't you?" he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "It's all true. Grandma Edith's work must be finished. Our family must achieve immortality, and you, Laura, are the final piece." Laura backed away, her mind racing. "You're insane, Simon. This is madness." Simon stepped closer, holding a ceremonial dagger that glinted menacingly in the dim light. "It's not madness. It's destiny," he whispered, advancing on her. "You're the key to our family's eternal life." Laura's survival instincts kicked in. She grabbed an old heavy lamp from a nearby table and swung it at Simon, striking him in the side. He staggered but didn't fall, his eyes burning with fanaticism. Laura bolted for the stairs, her heart pounding in her ears. Simon recovered quickly, pursuing her through the dark, narrow halls of the farmhouse. The whispers grew louder, almost as if the house itself was urging him on. Laura could feel his breath on her neck as she burst into the kitchen, desperately searching for a way out. In a final, desperate struggle, Laura managed to wrench open the back door. Simon lunged at her, but she kicked him back, slamming the door shut behind her. She ran into the night, the cold air biting at her skin, but she didn't dare look back. Simon's enraged screams echoed behind her as she fled into the darkness, her only thought to escape the nightmare that had become her inheritance. Laura's escape was far from easy. As she ran through the dense underbrush surrounding the farmhouse, Simon's pursuit was relentless. He grabbed at her, and she fought back with every ounce of strength she had. Branches scratched her arms and face, and she stumbled over roots and rocks, but sheer terror drove her forward. She could hear Simon's crazed mutterings close behind, his determination chilling her to the bone. With one final burst of adrenaline, Laura broke through the tree-line and onto the main road. She could hear Simon's footsteps falter and stop, but his voice carried through the darkness, echoing in her mind. "Family always finds a way," he promised, the words seared into her memory. Laura collapsed onto the roadside, gasping for breath, her body battered and bruised. The distant sound of Simon's voice faded, but the psychological scars remained. She managed to flag down a passing car, and the concerned driver took her to the nearest town. Though she was safe for now, the ordeal had left her deeply shaken. In the weeks that followed, Laura tried to resume a normal life, but the experience haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that Simon was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every shadow, every creak in the night, filled her with dread. The farmhouse stood silent and empty, but its dark legacy lingered. Laura knew that as long as Simon lived, the threat of the ritual remained. Her life was forever overshadowed by the fear that one day, Simon would return to complete the dark ritual, and she would once again be trapped in the nightmare of her family's twisted past.